I want you to take your Bibles and turn to Proverbs 26, okay? We're in the study of Proverbs. We're going to talk about the wisdom of being quiet. We're going to talk about this this evening, okay? Now, before you get started, I want to just say to you what we're not saying. I want to clarify what we're not saying, okay? So there are 4 things we are not saying, or maybe there's 5 of them, okay? First of all, we're not saying you should clam up, okay? There's not a lesson saying you just need to clam up and just, or become moody. Now, nobody does that, but I know some people that do it, and they get moody, and they're just a pain to live with. Because what's wrong? None. Not really, what's wrong? None. Something's bothering you. No, it's not. You know what that's called, don't you? Lying. There you go. Liars shall be friars. That's lying, okay? Liar, liar, pants on fire, okay? When somebody asks you, what's wrong? And you say, now if you know it. Now, if you don't know it, then you don't know it. I mean, you may not have a grasp on it, but if you actually know there's a problem, that's just not, it's lying, okay? Thirdly, it's not a vehicle to inflict pain. Silence should not be a vehicle to inflict pain, but many people, particularly people who have been married longer than 17 minutes, sometimes like to inflict pain by simply being quiet. I know my wife wants me to talk, or my husband wants me to talk. It's usually the other way around, but anyhow, I want you to talk, and it's like, I'm not going to do it, and make them suffer. And next, it's not a tool to get your own way, okay? Silence is sometimes used by people using the pain they inflict. And then lastly, it's not an excuse not to talk. I'm not talking tonight about not talking. So don't take the message tonight and say, well, the Bible says I need to be quiet, so I'm going to go home and be quiet and not talk like I should to other people. But that's not what we're talking about, okay? Now, with that clarified, look at Proverbs 26 and look at verse 4. Proverbs 26. Is that what I said? Okay, it's good. Proverbs 26 and verse 4 and verse 5, okay? Proverbs 26, 4 and 5. Now, this is going to be an interesting start here tonight, okay? Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. So the question is, which command is to be obeyed? The first one when it says, answer not a fool according to his folly, or the second command, answer a fool according to. So which is it? Any ideas which one may be correct? Maybe which one we should take out of the Bible? First of all, should we take either one of them out of the Bible? No, that's true, okay. So what do we have here? Yes?
Don't be stupid like the guy who said something stupid, tell me stupid for diplomatic.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you saying that. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, what it is, what we have here is a common form of, it's called parallelism. It's found in the Old Testament. It's a common way of making a point by saying things that seem contradictory at one point, but when you think it through, it makes quite a bit of sense. And basically, you were correct. The dumb part, that's what I would say. So I'm like you, but that probably. So we may not say it like that right this second. But the verse 4 is telling you when not to speak. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him. Okay. Now here's the problem with talking. A fool is not someone who is ignorant, because we're all ignorant of something. We don't know what you don't know. That's why you don't know it. We all had to learn stuff. So a foolish person is not an ignorant person. And a foolish person is not a person who just is a weak person. Okay? In Thessalonians it talks about there are 3 kinds of people that have needs. There are weak people, the feeble-minded. Okay, there are weak people, and then there are immature people, and then there are wicked people. Okay, and so he's saying here, a fool is someone who just refuses to listen. They have all these excuses. Well, I just can't do that. This and that and the other, and it's as plain. May I say this, as the nose on your face. You know, there is a time to study and a time to think and a time to pray. But when you look at this and the answer is so simple, you just simply have to do it. You do the next right thing. We tend to complicate it. Okay, we do make life much more complicated than I thought. Now, you got to understand what people are going through. I heard this true story of a pastor who said, you know, I don't do much counseling. And they said, why don't you do this? True story. He said, I don't, why? He said, well, I don't know if couples don't come to me, because one came to me and went on and on about how bad their marriage was. And this is a true story. He said, let me ask you a question. Did you say for better or for worse when you got married? You know, for better or for worse? And he said, well, yeah, we did. He said, well, this is the worst. So go back home. And he said, you know, nobody at my church comes to me much anymore, you know, about marital problems. But, you know, there's an element of truth there, isn't it? Right? I mean, that's not mean there may be other things you can help with, but some things, and a fool here is somebody who simply refuses to do what they know is right, okay? So what he's saying in verse 4 is, don't engage somebody who is in that place because they're not listening to you. And in order to communicate them, you got to talk as crazy as they are. Or as dumb, I think you said, whatever the word you used, which probably was a nicer word than my word, crazy, but it was, you know, I got to be like them. But the next verse says, okay, answer a fool according to his folly, lest, and the last phrases of each of these give you the distinguishing factor. In verse 4, you don't want to be like him and engage in the same silliness, okay? All right? And, you know, but in verse 5, you have to answer him, lest he be wise in his own conceit. In other words, he stays in his ignorance. And the idea, the word conceit there really does magnify the meaning of a fool. It's someone who's just, well, I'm right. No, you're not right. Well, I am right. Well, you're not right. I think it's right. What doesn't matter what you think? Okay? You can have your own opinion, but it doesn't make it right. And if you're really honest with yourself, you know you're not right. So if you're not right, deal with it. Now, that's the point there, okay? All right, so that's the point. Now, with that said, okay, I want to talk to you tonight about three things, okay? Number one, why we should choose to be quiet, okay? Second, when should we choose to be quiet? And number three, how do we choose to be quiet? So those are the things we're going to talk about, okay? I want to encourage you tonight. We should get through this tonight, but you never know with us. It could happen. So I want you to talk about why I want you to think this through here because I will tell you, okay, one of the challenges, now I should have put a sixth one down under what we're not talking about, and that is, we're really not talking about not witnessing, okay? I've more than once in my life have had like a V8 moment saying, man, I should have said something much more. I much more regret not talking when I'm witnessing. I very seldom regret keeping my mouth shut. I don't have a clear sense what I should be saying before the Lord about something. Just keep my mouth shut, okay? And but why should we choose to be quiet? And I want to give you three reasons, okay? I'll give you three words to write down if you're interested in writing them down. Why we should be quiet. And here are the three things. Letter A, okay? Let's go on. Okay, letter A, because of valuing. Okay, these are the words: valuing, prevention, and understanding. We're going to look at some verses, okay, about why do I choose to be quiet? Because you do know this. Just because, you might want to write this down, just because you're right, it doesn't mean you should speak. Just because they're wrong, it doesn't mean you should speak. You say, well, that is not right, you know. Well, okay, well, they may not be right, and you may be completely right. But just being in the right doesn't mean it gives you the right to say it, okay? Sometimes, now take your Bibles and turn to Proverbs 11 and verse 12, okay? Not all these will be in Proverbs, but most of them will be in Proverbs. Proverbs 11, and I really want you to think about this, and verse 12, okay? Now you got to think through these Proverbs. They're really cool Proverbs as far as to get us to think about being quiet. Verse 12, he that is void of wisdom, which is a foolish person, but here, take it back. A person void of wisdom is not necessarily a foolish person. He can be a foolish person. He can simply be an ignorant person, okay? But here, watch this, despises his neighbor, okay? So if you don't, the word despiseth means to disrespect, okay? Now, I'm telling you, I don't care who you want to win an election, okay? It doesn't give you the right to be disrespectful to people, whoever they are. You say, well, they're just dumb for thinking that. Well, that may be dumb for thinking, but that's just not nice. You got to respect the fact, because the fact is, you've done dumb stuff too. I mean, I voted in enough presidential elections to realize that sometimes my person wins, and I'm glad, but they win sometimes, and afterwards I think, well, it didn't really quite work out like I thought they were going to work out. That maybe wasn't a good move on my part, a good thought. But you got to be careful, okay? But so the idea of disrespect is the idea of despising is disrespect, okay? The word void is you lack wisdom, okay? Now watch this. But a man of understanding holdeth his peace. Now, to be a man of understanding, okay, is the idea of opposite of a man that has no wisdom. So a wise person holds his peace, okay? You may not like what somebody believes. You may think, well, how can a person that is slightly intelligent and turn oxygen into carbon dioxide have that particular view about something? Well, they may be, but you have to hold your peace because you want to value people, okay? Now look at verse 13. A talebearer reveals secrets. Of course, a person who's a talebearer is a slanderer. One who says things. Now, a slanderer is not somebody who's necessarily telling a falsehood about somebody. You can slander somebody with truth, but it's truth that's nobody else's business. Just because you know something about somebody that's not nice doesn't give you the license to tell other people about that not nice thing. There's not a reason for it, okay? So a talebearer reveals secrets, but he that is faithful does what? Concealeth the matter. He's quiet. Why? Because he values people. Valuing people, if you respect them, then there are times you hold your peace because I value you. Okay, fine, you don't see it like I see it. You don't agree with me. Well, that's fine, okay? Let's go get a piece of pizza. I mean, I'm not talking about sin, confronting sin, the need to do that sometime. This is not talking about that. This is just talking about people who need to be respected, okay? All right? So you value them, all right? The second word, though, is the word prevention. Look at Proverbs chapter 10 and look in verse 8, okay? And that is, a wise in heart will receive commandments. In other words, they are teachable, okay? But a prating fool, okay? The prating is one who can't keep his mouth shut. It's donk, and donk, and donk, and donk, and donk, and donk, and donk. Nobody's listening, but they don't care. Donk, and donk, and donk, and donk. And they're just going. And the contrast here in verse 8 is again the fool versus the wise. So what this person is saying is not only not needed, it's not helpful, okay? And so I want to restrain because I don't want to be a prating fool. I don't want to be one that's going on. So I want to prevent the fall. Notice the consequence. He shall fall. In other words, I want to prevent going down a path that's not good for me, okay? All right? And the one we read earlier, I'll refer back to it, Proverbs 26:4, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him. So I want to prevent being like a fool. I want to prevent getting sucked into it. I want to prevent falling. So sometimes I hold my peace. Why don't I say something? Because I want to prevent something that this is not going to go well. Now, I know people. I have family members. I have one or two friends in my life. And the one or two friends I have, I know how to push their buttons. I know if I bring up a particular topic, it's probably not going to go. I try not to bring it. I don't always succeed. In fact, sometimes I fail quite miserably. But I try, particularly with family members, but I try not to bring it up because there's really no value in it, okay? All right? So keep that in mind. And then understanding. Look at Proverbs chapter 11, okay? And just a word back here. He that is void of wisdom despises his neighbors, but a man of understanding is one that, okay, and the word understanding there, going back to this particular word, understanding, is the idea of grasping objective knowledge. Hold your peace. Now let's make an observation here, okay? If I'm going to understand something, I've got to be quiet enough to listen to it. I can't keep talking. Can't keep asking questions. I've got to be quiet so I can hear what's being said. So sometimes I'm quiet so I can understand something. Sometimes I'm quiet to prevent conflict and disarray. Sometimes I'm quiet to just value the person. I had somebody the other day. The issue is totally irrelevant, but it's an issue. And the person did something. And the person was talking about it and was quite proud of it, and rightly so. But there was something about it that was significantly lacking, okay? But I didn't bring it up. Why? Because he's having a wonderful talking about how wonderful it was that what he did. It wasn't a wrong thing. It wasn't sin. But he made a mistake about something, and I didn't bring it up. I said, well, that's wonderful. Very good job. Well done. Well done. Why? Because there's just no value in saying some things, okay? All right, now with that said, okay, so I gotta be quiet for a reason, okay? Second, when are those reasons, okay? Those are I'm trying to absorb that there's some practical reasons when should I, because these are just sort of markings in the sand, if you would, please. I'm going to give you 4 of them, I believe, okay? Letter A, to give it time, okay? Let's talk about this, okay? To give it time. Second, to stop destruction, to stop it, destruction. C, to give God time to work. Now, we're going to talk about that in a moment. That is different than C, than A. And then D, to prevent sin. Okay? So I do it to have when these things are needed. So let's look at Proverbs 29 and verse 11. Okay? 29 and verse 11. Okay? Look what it says here in verse 11. Oh, if a wise man, verse 11, I'm sorry. A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it till afterwards. Okay? In other words, there is a wisdom that uttereth all the time, okay, has the idea in the Hebrew of letting all your feelings out through your vocal cords. Just let everything out there, okay? No filter. But a wise person keeps it back until afterwards. He gives the thing time to unfold. One of the best illustrations I can remember here, one of the few times in my youth, my whole life probably, but in my youth, where I actually demonstrated a bit of wisdom. I was one staff at a church in North Carolina. The first time I moved to North Carolina, I was at a church and on staff. And after the service, okay, they were talking about going coon hunting. Okay? Now, do you know what coon hunting is? What is it? Raccoon. Yes, exactly, okay? But I had never heard the term before. In my background, not advocating this, but my background, the word coon was used to refer to a particular color kind of person. And the conversation was going like 5 minutes. And I remember thinking, where are the robes and the crosses? I have gotten myself in a predicament. And you said, well, how silly could you be? Well, I was 23. I don't know how silly you can be when you're 23. I've never heard the term before. But I said, this isn't right. I remember thinking this. I mean, they're going to tree them, and they're not very kind at all to the people down here. I mean, I'd come from Indiana to North Carolina, in like 78 or whatever, 79. I thought, well, this is like, and there was just one color in our church, just one color. Just, there may be red and yellow, black and white every place else, but in our church, it's just white folks, And so that's how it was. So I kept my mouth shut. Thank God. And I don't know, it was elongated. Now, it may have been as long as but it seemed like a long time. Then something was said. Oh, yeah, that'd be fun. I was like, Now, you say, well, that was just silly. Well, maybe it was silly, but it really happened to me, okay? I'm just telling you that you have to give things time, okay? And there is wisdom to just filtering what you're going to say, for the purpose of holding it back until later, because it can be beneficial, okay? Now look at Proverbs chapter 13, okay? Proverbs 13, and look at verse 3, okay? We're talking about stopping destruction, okay? Chapter 13, verse 3, he that keepeth his mouth keepeth his life, but he that openeth wide his lips shall have destruction. The word destruction there means two things. This Hebrew word has two meanings to it, okay? It means to bring terror to people, or to bring terror, and it means to bring ruin. So you have to be careful, okay, what you say to people, because you can bring them terror and ruin by saying things you didn't say. Another one of my illustrations of my brightness when it comes to communication. When Jonathan was 9 years old, I mentioned this before, he was 9 years old, and so I was trying to be philosophical with him. I said, well, son, your life with us isn't half over. 9 and 9's 18, about time for you to leave home when you're around 18 usually. You know what I'm saying? You're going off to college or whatever, So I was trying to get him to think about time in a different way. So 3 days later he comes to me and says, Daddy, am I dying? And I think, where'd you get that from? He thought I was telling me he was dying. I mean, he missed completely what I was saying. I felt awful. Because for 2 or 3 days, this kid had been walking around thinking he was sick or dying or something. And if you know Jonathan back then, that was pretty understandable. But anyhow, and so I didn't mean to bring terror into his life, but I did, okay? So we have to be careful. If you say something to somebody, is it going to scare them? Okay? Are you just blowing smoke to make you feel good, to make them feel bad? Okay? You got to be careful. You got to think it through. Okay? Now, look at Exodus 14. Okay? This is more of an application, but it's worth it to take a trip over to Exodus. Okay, for a moment. Look at Exodus chapter 14. Look at Exodus chapter 14 and look at verse 14. Now, this, I am applying this. It applies to speech. It's not primary to speech, but it applies to our overall demeanor. Okay? Chapter 14, verse 14. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. And the word peace there means, it's a Hebrew word that means to be plowed or cut in or grooved within a place where you're staying. Okay? But the point here is that you're not trying to do what only God can do. I want to just challenge you about being careful and think about the wisdom of being quiet when you're trying to do what only God can do with somebody. Because you cannot talk them into doing right. You can't argue them into doing right. The person doesn't want to listen to you, and they don't want to listen to you. Right? So you have to be careful here that you give God time to work and don't use your words, or in this case, you can include the actions too, to try to get out of your space. Let God do what only God can do in the conversation. Okay? So that's the challenge. when it comes to our communication. Let's go back to Proverbs for a second. Proverbs chapter 10, okay? I mentioned we're going to do Proverbs thematically, and that's what we're doing tonight. Chapter 10. And there's a fourth. When do I need to limit what I'm saying and try to be quiet? Okay, Proverbs 10:19. Okay, in the multitude of words there wanteth not sin, but he that refraineth his lips is wise. And the phrase wanting not sin is a way of saying in the English language, based on the Hebrew there, of sin abounds. So the multitude of words, there's a lot of sin. So the more I talk, the more I'm apt to say something I shouldn't say. Okay? So I have to be quiet sometimes because I know if I say something, I'm going to say something I shouldn't say. Okay? I'm going to say something that would be wrong for me to say. Just to remind you again that it is wrong sometimes to say right stuff. It is wrong sometimes to say right stuff because it's not the time to say it. Or you're not the person to say it, okay? Or they're not ready to hear it yet. Remember the story of David and Bathsheba, and when Nathan came to Bathsheba, it was a whole year before David was to the place where he could hear the words, "Thou art the man," 4 words. But he wasn't ready to hear it yet, so God didn't send it to him yet, okay, until it was the right time. So to prevent sin, okay? So then comes the question, how can I quiet when I'm not tend to be a quiet person? Now, some of you probably are just quiet by nature. You're not quiet because you're spiritual. You're just moody. No, maybe you're moody. You're just quiet. In other words, you wake up in the morning with about 18 words to use for the day, and you usually have a couple of words left over. And if you're that way, you've probably been married, and you're probably been married to somebody who has 25,000 words. Okay, and they get some borrow your words, maybe they get some on credit, and it's a big difference, okay? So if you're a quiet person, don't leave here thinking, I must be spiritual. Because some of the most carnal people I know are very quiet. They're moody, they're a pain, difficult, because they won't talk, okay? They won't talk to their spouse. They won't talk to their friends. They just have this. It's like the high school kid that comes to youth group and has to sit in the back and have his back against it and watch everybody else, and doesn't want to be exposed, kind of thing. So don't hide behind a quietness that is rooted in narcissism or selfishness. Okay, but when we're godly quiet, okay, we're quiet. When we're trying to give it time, we're trying to stop destruction, we're trying to give God time to work, and we're trying to prevent sin. We do it because we're valuing people, we're trying to prevent more difficulty happening, we're trying to have an understanding, so we're quiet for a reason. Now, how do we do it? Well, look at Proverbs chapter 18, okay? And there are 3 of these, by the way, okay? So, number 3, okay? And all 3 at one time, that's good, okay. All right, the word listening, the word knowledge, and the word grace. Okay? How do I choose to be? First of all, I listen. Okay? In James, you're in Proverbs 18 and verse 13. Okay? Verse 13. He that answereth the matter before he heareth it is folly to him. The idea there, we mentioned this, I believe, before. And but the idea here is that we hear it out, okay? We listen. I'll give you a reference to write down, James 1:19. We won't turn James 1:19. Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every one of you be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. The phrase slow to speak means to talk with deliberation, okay? But you have to listen, okay? Now, do you understand this, okay? You listen with your eyes. You might want to write this down. This will be worth you remembering, okay? You listen with your eyes. You listen with your body. And you listen with your ears. And you listen with your mind. So I am listening. I'm looking at you. I am looking at you, if at all possible. If you're on the phone, you're not looking, but you're looking at them. You are physically turning. You're not doing something out. Now sometimes you can do that. I mean, somebody walks by and you're doing something at work. They say, "Hey, what time is lunch?" It's 12 o'clock, and you go. That's not. You're not having really a conversation there. But when you're listening, okay. Now I'm a multitasker. I mean, when I go to work out in the morning, I usually have an earpiece in, and I'm usually working out. So I'm following an app on my workout thing. I'm usually talking to some people once in a while or whatever, and I'm listening to right now David Limbaugh's book on the Bible, whatever, and it's a good book. Anyhow, so I can multitask, but so when you're not listening to anybody, well, I'm listening to some things, but you got to be careful here, okay? Though sometimes you will be multitasking, there are times to simply listen, and be very careful about always putting people that are talking to you in the group of all the stuff you can be doing. People need you to listen to them. Okay. Well, I'm doing something else. Well, maybe you should. And I battle this myself. Okay. Once I discovered the speaker on the cell phone, that gives you a license to do whatever you want while they're talking to somebody almost. Okay. And there are times you can do that, okay? It's not a problem. But if you're really talking to somebody, you need to listen. If you want to be quiet, then listen to what people are saying. Let me ask you a question. Do people that talk to you believe you're actually listening to them? Okay? Actually hearing them. If you're married, does your wife think you listen to her? Does your husband think you listen to him? Do your kids think you listen to them? So, interesting thought. So I choose to be quiet by listening. Second, look at Proverbs 17. Okay? Proverbs 17, and look at verse 27. He that hath knowledge spareth his words, and a man of understanding is of an excellent spirit. Even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted wise, and he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. The last part of that, verse 28, sounds, if you're a dummy, you can look a lot smarter if you just be quiet, okay? But the first part of it, a man of knowledge spares his word. So I listen by taking time to understand things. I won't talk as much. That's not true. I will be able to control and listen better if I know what's being talked about. And so I've got to be a student of life and understand that my knowledge about something, and that brings me to a point, when you're listening to somebody and they use terms and words and expressions you don't know about, don't know what it means, the wise thing to do is simply say, excuse me, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that term means. So I can't move forward in the conversation because you're using terms I don't know. Okay? So knowledge is how I choose to be quiet. I'm working at understanding what's going on. And the final one is grace. I'm just going to have time to read this to you, okay? Ephesians 4:29. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearer. You see, I'm going to be quiet if my objective is to give grace to people that are hearing me. Because that objective of grace will control what I say and what I don't say, how much I say it, how much I don't say it. Because the word communication, okay, in the passage it talks about communicating from your mouth, what you say, but we all understand this. What we say is only part of the concept of communication. Communication is also what I receive in. So I've got a desire to give grace to people, okay? So my question to you is, are you a good listener? Are you known as somebody who actually listens to what people say? Or do you live in the world of sound bites? Or simply, remember this, you might want to write this down. Listening is not simply waiting to speak, okay? It is seeking to understand. Okay? Now, we live in a culture, particularly coming out of this political, well, I don't know if we're ever out of it, this political campaign and all this thing, and this is, you know, these people are awful, and these people are awful, and everything, and all that. Well, you know, and we can get accustomed to thinking like they talk on television. Is there really much on the news shows? Is there really much communication going on the news shows? Not really. They have what they're going to say, and they're going to argue, and they're going to say this, and they're going to say this, and they're not listening to each other. You never see anybody on those news shows say, "Oh, you know what? Oh, yeah, you were right. I was wrong." No, they're just trying to get their sound bites in. Okay. You say, "Well, that's what that business is." It may be, but it doesn't have to be the way we live our lives. Okay. So can we pray tonight and ask God to do two things? First of all, to show us how good a listener we actually are. Thinking all these things through. And then asking him, if I need to be made a better listener, ask him to make us that.